So Socrates has given it his best shot, I would say. And what I mean by that is he's given several arguments which are plausible that after the separation of the soul from the body, that the soul continues an independent existence of its own. But he's talking to a couple of people here who have ideas of their own, Simmias and Cebes, uh, who, again, are being very delicate in their skepticism. But because Socrates is so open, because Socrates is in such good humor and is so encouraging of questions, and himself admits that there's plenty in what he said to be questioned, that they come out with their own objections. And the first comes from Simmias, and I think it's probably the most important objection. Cebes also makes an objection, but I think it's the one that Simmias makes, which I find the most interesting. So he says this, here we're on page 26. He says to Socrates, "Very good, Socrates, then I will tell you my difficulty." And the difficulty is whether, you know, difficulty about the soul actually living on after its separation from the body. And Cebes will tell you his. "I feel myself, and I dare say that you have the same feeling, how hard, or rather impossible, is the attainment of any certainty about questions such as these in the present life." Because these are metaphysical questions. These are questions that cannot be answered through our usual means of answering questions, because they're about things that we can't have direct experience of, at least in the form we are now. And we'll be talking a lot more about that, the metaphysics of it. "And yet I should deem him a coward who did not prove what is said about them to the uttermost, or whose heart failed him before he had examined them on every side. For he should persevere until he has achieved one of two things. Either he should discover, or be taught, the truth about them, or if this be impossible, I would have him take the best and most irrefragable of human theories, and let this be the raft upon which he sails through life, not without risk, as I admit, if he cannot find some word of God which will surely and safely carry him. And now, as you bid me, I will venture to question you, and then I shall not have to reproach myself hereafter with not having said at the time what I think. For when I consider the matter, either alone or with Cebes, the argument does certainly appear to me, Socrates, to be not sufficient." And he's made some really good points there um, about how difficult it really is to come to any sort of definite conclusion about what happens to the soul after it separates from the body, right? It's not something that anybody has any direct experience of. And here is his objection. He says, "In this respect," replied Simmias, "suppose a person to use the same argument about harmony and the lyre. Might he not say that harmony is a thing invisible, incorporeal, perfect, divine, existing in the lyre which is harmonized, but that the lyre and the strings are matter and material, composite, earthy, and akin to mortality?" You see how he's making a metaphor for the human being. The human being is composed partly of the physical, the body, but the soul is something invisible, incorporeal, right? It's something that is non-physical. So that is a way of characterizing the human being as we know ourselves, as being mind and body, or spirit and flesh. And it's similar to the situation between the lyre, the musical instrument, which is composed of strings, which are just matter, and wood, which is just matter, and the harmony, which is incorporeal, which is something divine and not physical. Okay, so, but then he says, "And when someone breaks the lyre or cuts and rends the strings, then he who takes this view would argue as you do, and on the same analogy, that the harmony survives and has not perished. You cannot imagine," he would say, "that the lyre without the strings and the broken strings themselves, which are mortal, remain, and yet the harmony, which is of heavenly and immortal nature and kindred, has perished before the mortal. The harmony must still be somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay before anything can happen to that." And his point is that that's ridiculous, right? The thought, Socrates, must have occurred to your own mind that such is our conception of the soul, that when the body is in a manner strong and held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, then the soul is the harmony, or due proportionate admixture of them. But if so, whenever the strings of the body are unduly loosened or overstrained through disease or other injury, then the soul, though most divine, like other harmonies of music or works of art, of course perishes at once, although the material remains of the body may last for a considerable time, until they are either decayed or burned. And if anyone maintains that the soul, being the harmony of the elements of the body, is first to perish in that which is called death, how shall we answer him? So this is an extremely interesting picture that he's painted. He said that one can think of the relationship between soul and body as the same as between the harmony and the physical instrument, the physical musical instrument. They are two different things, but clearly the harmony depends upon the musical instrument. And so if the musical instrument is destroyed, so is the harmony. Why not think of the soul as being in the same sort of dependent relationship on the body as the harmony is on the musical instrument? That is, we recognize that we human beings are made up of body and soul. But the truth of the matter is that we're not familiar with what soul would be like without body. That is, we encounter ourselves as persons as having minds. We encounter other human beings who presumably have minds. We have never come across a mind that is not connected with the body. So why not think of the mind or soul or consciousness as being totally dependent upon body, something different from body, but something dependent on it, so that when the body is destroyed, as it surely is in death, so goes the mind, so goes the soul. It is a very, very interesting objection. It's probably where I want to stop for this week because it's so important, because it's such a great point. That is, to put it just clearly enough, I think, Socrates has painted a certain picture of the human being. He may be right about that. That is, that the mind or soul can exist independent of the body. I know I'm going a little bit farther than Simmias did here, but I think I'm in the same ballpark as his idea of soul as harmony. What evidence do we really have that the soul can exist independent of body? Have we ever experienced a soul without a body, either our own soul or anyone else's? So what if soul or mind were real? And I think it is real. That is, really distinct from body. But, and here's the really important qualification, what if soul or mind, consciousness, the immaterial part of the human being, were real, really distinct from body, but totally dependent upon body for its existence? Philosophers might say that mind or consciousness or soul is an emergent phenomenon, something distinct from body, from the physical, from the brain, basically, as we know, but something totally dependent upon the body, the physical, the brain. If that were true, obviously, we'd have a different picture than the one Socrates has been painting. So it's a big objection. It's not only the biggest objection, I think, within the Phaedo, it may be the biggest objection for us, for anyone who is trying to imagine a life after death, because a life after death would require and we're not really sure about that. We're not really sure how would you even go about that? How would you begin to try to, I mean, we can, I guess, maybe imagine it, but how would you actually go about proving it? And so we're at a very, very dramatic inflection point within this dialogue because it's clear that Socrates has not done enough to try to prove that this is actually a possibility. And that's, he's going to have to do something in the rest of the dialogue.